All right, guys, got a really simple one, I think, today. In another forum, there was a question about creating a background with a texture and some overlay gradients. I don't know if you can see them very clearly in this, but I will play with that. Um, and I'm going to show you today what I think is an easy way of creating that. We're going to use Bricks Builder for this, and we're going to use three websites as utilities. We're going to use this noise texture generator, a base 64 image encoder, and a mesh gradient generator. And I'll link to all these in the description. So what we're going to do is go back to our original site. I'm going to delete everything I've got there. I'm just going to add a section. In that section, I'm just going to style this all at ID just so it's nice and simple to follow. So I'm just going to select my min height and set that to maybe 70 VH, so we've got something to work with. And we'll push our container to the bottom. So push that container to the bottom there. I'll stick maybe some text and a button in there. I'm actually going to change the typography color because I'm going to put a color background. I'll make that a white. I'll make that a white as well. Okay, so we've got some text here. We can't see it right now because of that. In the section itself, I'm going to set a color. And that will be our background color, and I'm going to use my variables here, but you can use whatever you like for that. So I'm just going to set one of my variables here. So there's a color. Right, and that's pretty straightforward. Now we want to get some texture on top of that. So we're going to head over to our noise generator at noisetexturegenerator.com, and the default that it comes up with is exactly what we need. We can make that bigger so that the noise is more or less repeated, because you can kind of see some patterns in here a little bit where it's repeated a little bit. If you want less of that, you can make that bigger, but it's going to make your code a lot bigger as well. And I think once you drop the opacity back, you don't really notice that repeating textures in here anyway. There's a background color settings on here. And if we drop our noise opacity back, we can see that color. We drop back here, we kind of see that texture looks a little bit grainy on color, and that's exactly what we want. What we want to do is we want to have this at full opacity, and we want to tell it to have transparency. So only the black is visible, all the white is actually transparent. Okay, so we're going to put the transparency on and save that. So I'm going to download that. And I've just saved it to my downloads. We're then going to go to this base 64 encoder, which is base64-image.de. Again, I'll link to that. We're going to select that file. Actually, I might have to refresh the page here because I think it won't redo it once I've already selected it. So I'm going to select that file. And you can see it's converting it to a CSS. Now, if I have a look at the show code here, there's a couple of different options that it gives me. I'm going to dismiss that because I'm going to use this copy code. Now, what we want is we want the texture to sit on top of our background color so we can control the opacity of it. So I'm going to copy that to the clipboard using the copy CSS, come back to our editor, and I'm going to go into my CSS, and it's a little bit hard to see in Bricks here because it's a tiny little editor. If you've got advanced CMA, you can go full screen like that, which I love working, but I'm going to work basically how you might see it. So I'm going to press the R and tab and close brackets on that. And what we want to have here is we want to set our container or our section to be a position of relative. And we want to set the isolation to isolate. I'll explain that shortly. I've explained this once before, but now we've got that. What we want to do is add our texture. So we're going to set our root again, but we're going to use the before. And we're going to set our content to be an empty string. We're going to set our position to absolute. I'm going to set our inset to 0. And with this one, we're going to set our Z index to -2 because we're going to put some radial radiance on top of that as another layer. So we're going to set our Z index to -2. And the reason we set isolate on our parent container here is that a z-index of -2 would mean it would disappear behind the color of that section. When we set that to isolate, that means that is our lowest z-index, so any negative index still sits on top of that container. So that's the reason we do that. Okay, now we're going to copy our, I already copied that to the clipboard, I think, copy CSS to the clipboard. I did. So now we're going to set our background image. Background image to be, I'm going to paste that image in there, and you can see our texture, which is on the scroll up. This is why you don't go more than 100 by 100, because you get a lot of this. So we're setting that to be absolute, and it's sitting on top of our color of our section, but see, it's not sitting on top of the content. And the reason for that is because we set that to be a z-index of -2. Now we want to be able to control how much of this texture is visible. So I'm going to come up to the center of the content there, the position I say, and I'm going to set my opacity. I'm going to set that to 0.4. All right, that's a bit too much. 0.2. We can see a texture now on top of our background color, just using that one color. And as you can see, because we've dropped the opacity back, even though we've only got a 100 by 100 noise and it's repeating, we can't really notice that repeating pattern. Okay, so I don't think you need to go bigger than 100 by 100 because you're not going to notice it anyway. Right, so there's our first part of our texture done. So we're going to save that. We'll see on our front end here, we've got a color in the background on our section. We've got our before, I think before we used, yes, we've got a texture sitting on top of that, which we created with this noise generator and then converted it to base 64 using this base 64 converter here. Next thing we need to do is create a radial gradients to go on top of it. Now we're going to play with this with the CSS anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Let's keep it simple. Let's make 4 of these. I'm going to drop the all of these back to black. Once you see how this generates, you don't really need to use the generator because you can do this purely in CSS. This is just an easy, quick tool for doing it. So I've got these textures here. Hard to see when they're black, but you can see these little circles on top of them. If you click on those, you can drag those, say, into that corner there. Maybe drag that one up into this corner over here. Drag that one down there, and drag that one maybe there. So maybe you want more than 4, maybe you want 5, I'm not sure. But this is a very simple way of doing it. Okay, now that we've got our black radial gradients, we can then hit the export, and that will give us the content we need for that. We don't want a background color because we want to keep our color transparent. So we're just going to grab the radial gradient background image here. Just going to copy that, go back to my editor, and because we've got so much base 64 below, I'm just going to put my CSS above that. I'm going to do R dash or R tab, and I want to use my after this time. I'm going to do the same thing, or position, absolute, content, empty string. You need to do that, otherwise it just doesn't display at all. Whoop, 2 E's in content. We want the inset of 0. And I'm going to just paste that in there, and we've got it sitting on top of our content, and it's sitting also on top of our copy and everything here because we need to set our Z index. So I'm going to Z index of -1. So -1, so it sits on top of our before, but it sits behind our content. Okay, now we set our opacity to 0.4. Go, that's given us some. Maybe you want more, 0.5, 0.6. I think that's probably starting to take over too much, but let's say it's 0.6. We look at this now and we go, actually, you know, this gradient here, I'm not sure how you can tell which one's which on here, but what it's saying is it's going to start at 11% and then go to 89%. Okay, And then the transparency on that starts at 0 and goes to transparency of 50. These are all 89, 21, 14, 10. So that's a small one. Maybe if we start playing with, if I change that to 80. Oh, 84. That gradient change, if I change that to 10, you can see the gradient moved. So we want to say from 10 to 50. So that's where it's placing it. So 10, 10. And we want to go from, we want to change the size of it. So did that change? 10, 10, 10. So just this top left corner one we're watching here, the 10, 10, if I can type correctly. And now what we want to do is that last transparency there, is that's how far along before it gets transparent. So we might want to extend that. So on that one, let's make that say 80. My keyboard is not working the way it should, so I'm going to make that 80. And what we've done is we've actually made that bigger. We've made that gradient, radial gradient bigger. I'll show you what I mean. If I make that 10, it's really tight, really small up in the top left-hand corner. If we make it 50, that's what it was. Make it 60, it's a bit bigger. 70, it's a bit bigger. Let's come down to the one that's down the bottom, which I would say would be the biggest number. So this one here, it's starting at 89 and going down to 21. This one's starting at 96, 91. That'll be the bottom right. So 96% across and 91% down is where that one's starting. So let's change that to 80. So it moves it up a little bit. Make that 86. 86. And let's make that 70. So we're just making that a little bigger there. And you can see the texture starting to take place. If you think it's too much, you can drop it back by changing the opacity, say 0.4. You know, if you want more, 0.7, 5. Try that, save that. And there we go. So we've got some texture in the background with some noise, and we've got some radial gradients over the top, which is barely noticeable, but it does change the way that looks. We want more of it. Maybe we might make that 0.7. See what that looks like in the front end. There we go. So you can see our radial gradient is darker, so it's filling more space. So that's it. That's what I would do. I would create a section, put a color behind it. I'd use my before, set it to position relative and isolate. Use my before to put my gradient, sorry, not my gradient, my noise at a z-index of -2. I'd use my after to put my radial gradients at a z-index of -1. And then you've got plenty of control over this, and just play with the colors, play with the size of your radial gradients. Your noise on your texture you don't really need to do much with. You might, because that's darker now, you might want to bring it up a little bit. So instead of 0.2, maybe that's 0.4. So you can see more of the noise, 0.3. Say 0.3 there. What do we got there? What does that look like? So there we go. That looks better because we've got a darker overlay with our radials. We might be able to bring a little bit more noise texture in there so we can see it a bit more. So just playing with those numbers until you get what you like. All right, that's it for today. I hope you like that. If you do, hit the like, hit the subscribe. Thanks, guys.